Welcome to the Narrator Roundtable. I'm Kirt Graves. In the coming weeks, our audience will learn a lot about the Narrator Roundtable's 5 rotating permanent hosts. But before we dive into the important, thought-provoking, and potentially contentious hot topics that we thought deserved our attention, let's get to know each of our hosts a little better. Joining me today is my co-host, André Santana. Hi, André.
Hi. Excited to be here.
I am excited to chat with you. You'll have to help me remember, because I was trying to think of how I first knew about you. And it's either because of the DEI committee in PANA, but I think around the same time, and maybe even before, I think I was becoming aware of you because like a lot of the authors I follow and like other narrators that I really enjoy, like they started following you and like promoting your work. Like we were just kind of like in the same genre.
Yeah.
So I can't remember, like, did I meet you first or did I know of you first? But either way, I think it was around that same time of just like, there's a new hip, young, queer narrator on the scene and his name is André.
I feel like we had, I think we had like, we were in the sphere. We hadn't like, there was no text message. There was no DM at that point. And then I think when we were in the DEI group, we were like, okay, now we can talk.
Now we can talk.
Yeah.
Because it's creepy to reach out if there's no real connection.
No.
There are times with other narrators that I'm like, I just want to send them a message and ask to be their friend.
But I mean, okay, so like I have a friend in voiceover, Yinka, who 100% just did that. She just DM'd me one day and we talk
Nice.
like every day now. Like, yeah.
Love.
Yeah.
Well done. I need to bring that energy into 2024. So I would love for our audience just to know a little bit more about your background, where you're from, and how you got into this work. So can you kind of tell us your narrator origin story?
Absolutely. So my background goes all the way back to Brazil. I was born in Salvador and I came to Seattle pretty young. I grew up there, so that's where a lot of my accent comes from, is the Pacific Northwest. But I ended up doing this whole little weird journey where I dropped out of high school. I went to college in Massachusetts. I got my degree in psychology and biosocial studies and was just doing like higher ed / education work when the pandemic came around. And at that point, I hadn't really been reading a lot. Like when I was in college, I feel like reading and the process of reading just exhausted me. And so I wasn't doing a lot of it. But one of my friends recommended The Bone Witch to me by Rin Chapeko, and she loved it and she was gushing about it. And I was like, okay, I have to read this book, but I can't read it in print. I'm never going to make it. I'll try the audiobook. And it was Emily Wozeller and Will Dameron, and I've just never looked back ever since. I think that must have been October, and then that spring I got my first like setup and like sent in my first audition on ACX.
Wow, I did not know it was that fast.
It was well, because that turnaround was 2019 to 2020, and so I was on an audiobook listening marathon. And then when the pandemic happened and I was working from home, I'd like close my computer and be like, something's calling to me, something's speaking to me. And I don't remember what the turning point was of like learning you could be a narrator yourself. But I just remember like all these like amazing performances. Like I went back. I didn't just like read stuff. I didn't really have a TBR. I didn't just read stuff that I was curious about that was out then. I went back to like stuff that I might have read when I was in high school. Like I went back to, I think Gone by Michael Grant, like listened to that whole series and the narrator was amazing. Like, so I reversed. I had one of my first favorite books was The First Bad Man by Miranda July, which I had read in print like years ago. And then I went and listened to the audiobook. But yeah, and then spring 2019, I kind of started dabbling around. I had one book that I did over like 6 months, and then that came out January 12th, 2021, which I consider my narratorversary. Yeah.
Oh, I was going to ask you about that because you recently celebrated your narratorversary, and I was like, so what is the day? Like, what was the occasion that you counted? So it was the day your first book came out.
Exactly. Yeah. Before that, it felt too like ethereal, ephemeral,
right?
Something inconsistent, ungrounded. Yeah.
I know that one. I mean, obviously, I talked about how I was aware of you before I think I met you because we both love to do like queer fiction, queer YA in particular.
Mm.
But like, are there other genres or topics that you're passionate about when you approach storytelling?
Yeah. Two things that are surprising me right now. One is lit RPG. I'm in love. Oh my God.
Why the confused face?
Well, it's not
It
like
sounds like so much fun.
no, it is. And I beforehand, like if you had asked me, I wouldn't have said it didn't seem fun, but like the prospect of knowing like, oh, that's that genre in audiobooks that has a really specific like writing format and like
Mhm.
you do it in a certain, like it felt like and it's always like some 96-hour series or whatever. It felt like laborious, and it's usually fantasy, so there's like 30,000 characters. And I'm recording a series right now for Podium, and we're 2 books in. They've booked me for 5 books in this series, and they're all 13 hours each, and I'm having the time of my life. Like every time I go into studio to record that book, I'm like, this is the week we get to do Rogue Ascension. And I'm just like adoring it.
Love it.
And it shocked the hell out of me.
I
So
am
that
surprised that you are surprised.
I
But
just
only because, like, when I started, like, that was one of the ones that I was most excited about. Haven't done it. Nobody's hired me for it. If you're listening to this and want to, please reach out. But, like, my dating history was literally, like, one guy in high school and then my husband. So I did not think romance was gonna be at the top of my list of things that I,
fair
like,
enough.
lived in. I was like, "Oh, I'm not a romantic guy. I won't be doing romance." I'll be doing these, like, other, like, sci-fi, fantasy fiction books.
Yeah.
Nope, that's not been true at all. But it sounds like so much fun.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good time, and I just really appreciate the people who like hold up this genre because it's a blast and it's a marathon. But it's just so fun. What surprised me is like I wouldn't have said, oh, I'm not going to like that, but I think the amount that I liked it
Mhm.
has shocked me. And then the other one that's sneaking up on me is nonfiction. But when I started narrating, I literally explicitly said to myself, like, I'm not really going to do nonfiction. Like, if someone invites me to do it, like, I'll look at it and consider, but I'm probably going to turn it
Mhm.
down. And then my first nonfiction was Black Love Matters, which was like a multicast from PRH. And that was like a fun couple of essays. And I was like, okay. And I remember after APAC 2022, Simon and Schuster gave me, I think, what at the time that was, I think, my first full length nonfiction title was Building a Second Brain. And a year later, I got an Audie nomination for it, and I was like, wait. Okay, maybe I'll think about this in a different way. Like maybe I'll come back to this.
Am I good at this?
Oh my God. And like I trained a lot with Joel Frumpkin, and like one of his things is like, especially when it's written in first person, like nonfiction is character work. It's all character work.
Mhm.
And I tried to approach it like that. And so I find it really fun in that way. And just since then, like some of my favorite titles have the title that I'm gushing over 24/7 right now is a nonfiction title. And so I'm just like letting the possibilities of nonfiction wash over me for sure.
Yeah. I wonder how much of it too is just, like, the craving for different genres, like, for variety, like,
Mm,
and the challenge of doing something new.
yeah.
Like, I think all actors at some point in their career are like, "Okay, I'm really grateful for the work that I'm getting, but it's all very similar, and, like, now I just wanna break out and do something different." And it sounds like you are getting opportunities in different areas and finding like, "Oh, maybe I just like narration."
I just like this job. Yeah.
Right?
And that was like, so I love spreadsheets. That is one of the things I took away from having a corporate job for 4 years. And I do a year in review every year. So I like keep track of all my stuff in voice overview. And then it gives me a spreadsheet at the end of the year. And so I go in and I do a bunch of formulas and I find out like, what was my distribution of genres? How many hours did I record? What were my rate averages? All this different stuff.
Mhm.
And so there are a few things that are like important to me. One is I look at how often I'm matched up to the race of the character that I'm playing and the race of the author, just to be like, am I being pigeonholed? And for me right now, on both fronts, it's about like 30 to 70. 30% of the time, my race matches the author and the or the character.
Mhm.
I haven't looked at that by like sexuality, but I'm curious now to go back and do that.
Mhm.
But the other piece too is like genre distribution and audience distribution. So like how many children's, middle grade, young adult, new adult, and adult titles. All of that, I feel like I had worried for so long, like, oh, I'm being locked into middle grade and children's, which are only 10% of audiobook sales, and they don't have as big an audience or as big a budget. Um, and that hasn't necessarily like fully been reflected in the numbers when I go back. But my genres, I feel really grateful that like there's a really healthy variety of genres that I'm doing. And I think you're right. I think it's just like the excitement of opening a book and being like, I don't have to phone this in. Like this is actually asking something fresh of me at every page, and I'm gonna enjoy the process, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That when you can find that attitude, I feel like you're in a really good place.
Mm, mm.
'Cause and, like, we can't do it all the time, so, like, I don't want people listening to this to be like, "Oh, if I'm struggling with a project, that means the problem's with me and I'm not grateful enough." It's like, no, 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 no. We all go through phases of like, this work is just okay," or "This project is just okay." Um, but yeah, when you can take a moment to be like, "Oh, I just really like what I'm doing."
Yeah.
Those are good days.
Very good days.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm.
So, you were at the very beginning of your career, but I have a hypothetical question for you.
Okay.
The apocalypse is happening tomorrow. We've been given 24 hours notice, and some government agent has showed up at your door
Mm.
and is like, "Here, put 3 audiobooks that you've done into this time capsule, and we're gonna bury it and hope that, like, whatever comes after the human race is gonna find it." Uh, so what work are you interested in sharing with the next generation of humanity?
Ah,
What are those 3 books and why?
and you know, it's an election year, so it's not really even hard to imagine a situation like this. Um, I, I, I think there's okay. I can think of three. I think the first one I'd put in is "Stars in Your Eyes" by Kaysen Callender.
Mhm.
It's an adult romance, and Kaysen Callender is an author where, like, anytime I read something they've written, I know it's going to be about trauma and like navigating trauma.
Mhm.
Um, and it's a dual narration with a full cast in the interstitials, like spread between us. And so
Oh, wow.
it's me and another narrator we're doing this like romance, and then in between it's like it's YouTube videos, it's notes from therapists, it's tweet threads, it's all these things that like connect the story of these two actors having like a grumpy sunshine fake dating situationship.
Okay.
And what I loved about that book is a lot of my books I do actually go back and listen to, particularly ones that I'm like, oh, like maybe I'll submit this for something. But so I went back and listened to this one, and one, my co-narrator AJ Beckles is phenomenal in this book. He's also a like anime, video games voice actor, and he does like uh, what's the word I'm looking for? He does like he breathes intentionally throughout the book. There's these things that I think we're taught as audiobook narrators to leave out,
Mhm.
and a lot of it stays in. He, you know, his character is walking down a hallway. He's like, I take a deep breath, and we hear that breath.
Mhm.
Like there's so much of it that is so lived in the way he performs. I adore his performance in that book, and a lot of that happens with the characters in the interstitials. There's this like southern YouTuber who's like, you know, in love with one of the actors but hates the other actor. And so she comes on and she's like sobbing, and we hear her sobbing, and she's like blowing kisses. And so it's just like fun and lived in. And it's got all these little textures that are like, this isn't a podcast, but it's an audiobook, and this is what an audiobook can do, you know?
Mhm.
So that's one. The second is one that I just did and is going to come out at the end of the month, is The Words That Remain by Stenu Gahdel, translated by Bruna Dantas Lobato. And there's a few reasons I was super, super excited that they sent me this book. This was for Dreamscape. One was this, like, very casually just won the National Book Award for translated like literature in December. So we love that for them.
No big deal.
No big deal at all. Very excited for them. Very excited for them. But two, and I wish that there was a way for me to like show this to you, but the way that the book is written, there are entire sections of the book where there is no punctuation, no paragraph indentation except for commas. So you're reading, and the only thing as you're reading that tells you, oh, this has moved from first person narration to now dialogue, is that there's a comma followed by a capital letter. And it's just like that, like a block text. And so I did get a prepper, but I went through and had to like manually highlight entire sections of this book. And it's so intricate and it's devastating for one. And it was just a fascinating form to like narrate. And so that feels to me like a performance I really loved, a process that I really enjoyed, and then a book that just like, you know, if I had been the reader and not the narrator, would have just kicked my ass anyways.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, it's so interesting to hear you talk about that. I was just having a conversation with my my office mate, my friend who comes and works in my office sometimes, because I was doing a book that was not that complex or I guess vague, and it's you know, like, but I was doing a book where the writer really left a lot to the reader to interpret. And so it was just one of those times when you're doing a book and you realize that, oh, I have to make a decision for the person who's listening to this.
Yeah.
But there are so many other ways this could be interpreted if you were reading it off the page. And that is at once both very cool that you're trusted with that responsibility and have the opportunity to do that. And also sort of frustrating that you're spending the whole book having to make decisions and it's not just kind of spelled out for you. And also, like, you almost want to like reach through the earbuds and be like, go look at this on the page because you could take something totally different from it. But this is like the version of audio that's going to exist.
Yeah. God. And part of the reason that I love that too is because I think that we're also illuminating interpretations of the book that readers might not have encountered too. And it's just like, I don't know. That's why I love like the human process of narration is like, we are a point of interpretation. We are bringing something to this performance that is us and is uniquely us. Oh, I love this job. I love this job. The last book that I would put in the time capsule is Cito by Lawrence Ralph. And this book I recorded in December, and it just blew me away. All dynamite, no smoke. I feel like it's a nonfiction. And I thought I knew what I was getting into when I read the description and auditioned for it. It was about a teenager who had been murdered. There was like gang involvement in the murder. And it was just a story of his life and the circumstances that led up to it. And it was everything beyond my expectations. This is a book written by someone in this, you know, teenager who died, his extended family, who's a professor of urban violence and who talks not just about like incarceration and the systems in, you know, San Francisco and the history of the Mission District and the histories of like gangs and Latinos in California and all these different things, but is also like his personal experience. Like he went to, you know, this boy's funeral, even though they didn't really overlap much when Cito was alive. He was asked by the family to come and sit in on the DA's meeting when the city had found someone to charge with their son's murder. And he asks these like really complicated questions about vengeance in the context of like gang members and vengeance in the context of social justice. And his wife, who is more connected to Cito, is a professor of religion, and she studies a lot of Yoruba religions. And so he also like brings in these Yoruba stories and uses them to talk about like where he finds this boy as he's telling his story, or where he finds the family. And it's just like, people talk about books as tapestries, and this book I would put up on my wall. Like, it's just gorgeously woven together. And I feel like you couldn't give this book to a narrator and walk away with something you don't like. Like, the story was just so amazing. So that is the third book that I would put in this time capsule.
I love that. I love that. I also love what you just said, because it gets to something that I try to bring up as often as I can. The idea that you can give it to a narrator and like, if it's good, it will translate. Because so often reviewers or fans will talk about things in superlatives, like this was the best, or like this is the only narrator who could have done this book. And I always just want to be like, no, that's not helpful. like could we find a way to give a compliment without reducing everyone else, like without being reductive to everybody else? Like, say they did an excellent job, say it was a great fit, but we don't have to be like, this is the only person who could have possibly done a good job with this book. It's like, well, no, somebody else would have also done a great job, and it would have been different.
Yeah.
And that's the joy of the art that we do, is like, part of the art is matching the person to the book and then seeing what comes of it, what alchemy is created. So I love that acknowledgement of like, I love this work. I'm sure you did a great job. I hope you think you did a great job. But also having the humility and the just like the presence to be able to say like, this was also just very good. Like, I couldn't have screwed it up because it's so good, you know?
Yeah. I think like I'm there's so much of me that is, I feel it genuinely kind of holding on to these ideas of like meritocracy in the arts, or these ideas of like, you know, when people are celebrated, it's only because they've earned it. There's no other kind of, you know, I think emotionally, in the way I see myself reacting to the world, I know that I like see those things. But I feel like it's moments like these where it feels so easy to step back and be like, actually, I love so much about this. Like, I in the wake of AI, there are certain kind of narration styles that I'm like not a huge fan of. Like, maybe if I listen to the sample, I won't necessarily pick it up. That I'm more inclined to pick up now, because I'm like, I appreciate what it took for you as a human being to like get in the booth and do this. And it's, I'm just like very interested, I think, in us being people telling each other stories, both with real human writing, real human narration, just like all of it. I'm just like, I think, falling in love with all the little choices that we make.
Yeah, there's no such thing as good and bad. There's things I like and things I don't like, but that doesn't mean they don't have value or they wouldn't be considered wonderful to somebody else.
Exactly.
There's no such thing as good and bad.
Exactly. And as Audible reviews will always remind us, you can make a pitch perfect performance, and somebody else will believe that you told them how to feel. You you did too much on this.
Oh, that's gentle. That's gentle criticism. Other people will be like, I don't know how this person gets work. He's terrible.
Oh my God. I mispronounced Jane Eyre as Jane Eyre in a book, and it did not get caught in post-production, which is okay. It happens. I also didn't grow up reading Jane Eyre, so I didn't know. Right. But the reviewer was
to the gallows with you.
No, enough. Why would you ever? Was anyone listening to this? And it was great. Audible again. It was great to open up their previous reviews and see that actually they've never enjoyed an audiobook before.
Or when they do, they don't bother writing a review about it because that's less fun. Yeah. Human nature is a grand thing. And we will get into a lot of that as we continue to have conversations about audiobooks, about narrating, about the publishing industry in general. We are just getting started. Thank you for joining us for this introductory episode of the Narrator Roundtable. I enjoy any chance I have to chat with you, so I'm glad we got a chance to do this.
Me too.
If you are listening at home and you haven't already, you can subscribe to the podcast anywhere podcasts are available, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Audible. We have some incredible conversations about our industry and our craft that will be coming to you starting in 2024. In the meantime, you can learn more about the podcast and find links to our social media at narratorroundtable.com. You can also submit your questions for our panel of hosts and guests. What's on your mind? We want to talk about it. The Narrator Roundtable is produced and hosted by André Santana, Deanna Anthony, Gail Shalan, Kirt Graves, and Lindsey Dorcus. All copywritten material is shared with permission. Music and sound effects are licensed through Storyblocks Audio. All opinions shared are those of the individuals and do not reflect the positions or policies of any company or organization with which they happen to be associated.